Hi, I'm Diane Buchholz, Keller Williams Realty, with my team member Virginia, and also joining me is Kendra and Aimee from Florida Home Loans.
Hi. Hi.
I've asked them to join us to talk about maybe Hometown Heroes programs and some of the other great offerings we have for everyone out there who's looking to get into a home.
Okay, so Hometown Heroes is a really great program for down payment and closing cost assistance. So normally when people ask us about down payment or closing cost assistance, it's usually not something that's actually beneficial to them. There's a couple like county programs that are good for grants for that, but they run out of money like really, really fast. So typically when people are asking us about down payment assistance, it's something that it's not in their best interest. Like normally they're going to gouge them really hard on their interest rates and make their payment not affordable, and their purchase price goes way down because you have to make room in the debt ratio for that. But Hometown Heroes is the one program that like I really feel like is truly beneficial for buyers. It's really amazing. So right now, the qualifications for it are totally occupation based. So it's what you would think in the name Hometown Heroes. It's a pretty extensive list, but it comes down to, people in the medical profession, teachers, police officers. There is a minimum 640 credit score. That's one of the big ones. The debt ratio tends to be, it's similar to conventional loans. So for our FHA buyers, the debt ratio is about 6% lower than it would be with an FHA loan. So that's something else you'd have to keep in mind for qualifying. But outside of that, it's a full 5% of the loan amount that gets contributed. So let's say for an FHA buyer, it covers the full 3.5% down payment plus 1.5% of the closing costs, or the remaining 1.5% can be applied to closing costs. For a conventional buyer, if they were putting 5% down, it would cover the entire down payment. So
it's not to exceed 25,000.
Not to exceed 25,000, which your purchase price has to be pretty high to exceed that 25,000 with the 5%. And so you do have to be a first-time home buyer. There's a couple like small qualification things outside of that, but those are the main ones that you have to look at to make sure you qualify. There is a major rumor, like a very viable rumor that we have from a really good source, that's about to change. So everything will probably still be pretty much the same as far as qualifying, outside of the fact that it will not be occupation based. If you're a Florida resident and you are a first time home buyer and you have a 640 credit score and your debt ratios meet the requirements.
And as long as you work full time.
Yes, you have to be full time, and also like no non-occupying co-borrowers can co-sign with you. Like I said, a few small things. But if you live in Florida and you're a first time home buyer and you meet those requirements, then you're eligible for the Hometown Heroes program. And allegedly it's going up to $35,000 cap.
Okay.
We have been told that we should hear more around July 1st. So we have kind of been holding on to that information, because what we don't want is for people to hear that and cancel all their plans to purchase, right? And then it doesn't happen. And now they've put themselves in a massively more competitive market,
Right.
Missed out on possibly, purchasing a house. And now they're finding it even more challenging to find something. So we were holding on to that information. We're actually probably getting ready to start talking about it, simply because there's misinformation out there. So there are flyers going out from some lenders saying that it's been passed, that it's already in effect, Perez to call them, things like that. So just be aware of that.
It's still 5% now, though, so it's still a really
Right.
good.
Yeah, we do the Hometown Heroes program. We've closed a couple of them. I haven't had anybody who exceeded the 25,000 at this point. I mean, that's quite a bit.
Yeah. And what about people moving into the state for, again, we're looking at the qualifying occupation. So if they're moving in, do they have to stay here for 6 months, or?
They work full time in whatever the occupation is. Then like the big qualifier.
No, it does have to be your primary residence. So as long as you can qualify to purchase as a primary residence, as long as that works, it's a Hometown Heroes program.
Okay. And I guess segueing into that, when you're purchasing as a primary resident, you generally have to have, it has to be in the same field, right? Wherever you were.
Nope, not necessarily. We just have to have a 2-year work history in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be within the same field.
Okay.
Unless somebody is self-employed, then we have to have a 2-year work history of them being self-employed, obviously.
No, really the rules are you can't change the way that you're paid. So what you want, you can change your job at any point, even if you're pre-approved, you can get a new job while you're looking for a house. You just have to be careful that you don't want to make less money than what you were pre-approved using to qualify, and you don't want to change the way that you're paid. So like she said, self-employed, we need 2 years. So if you go from W-2 to a 1099, that immediately disqualifies you
And
from.
starts your 2-year history, like it starts your 2-year plan over again.
Yeah. So if somebody comes up to like, oh, I just got a new job, I'm making more money. And then we find out they're paid 1099, we're like, that's great. Now go find a W-2 job. Because if you go from 1099 to W-2, we can use that immediately as long as you have a 2-year work history. If you go from W-2 to 1099, now we have to start 2 years from scratch.
Well, I know also like I like if they've gone people when they have the approvals from like an FHA and go to a conventional, that's always fine. But going from a conventional to an FHA, a little different.
I think that that mostly gets into like with appraisals and stuff like that. So pretty transition. If you got a conventional appraisal and then we switch to FHA, you have to have that amended. Yeah, there's a little more strict.
Are there other programs that you guys have for, I guess, first time home buyers, or even like people that maybe have some trouble qualifying with some of the low credit scores? I know misinformation's been flying about if I have perfect credit and now I have to pay more than somebody who has poor credit.
We literally just had this conversation this morning.
Yeah, we were talking about it because I was like, I can't quite figure out the algorithm yet of where the difference is in the interest rates, but we ended up finding a chart that one of our lenders sent out who it actually affects with the interest rates.
If you really know how to read the heat map, the areas that are being de-incentivized with the interest rates are not necessarily that you have good credit, it's that you have good credit and you're putting a large down payment. And so a lot of times that comes down to what the investors are looking for on the secondary market for their portfolios. And so right now, if you look at the heat map chart, there are definitely some red areas for higher credit, but they're fully in the green, meaning incentivized even for good credit if you're just putting less money down. So basically for the higher credit people, if you put more than 5% down, they don't like it unless you're putting like 25 to 30% down. So basically, they don't want you putting over 5% to 20% down. Your interest rate is going to be higher if you're putting down more than 5%, but less than 25 to 30%, depending on what your credit score is. So that's just something you need to be working with the right lender who knows how to look at that and figure out, okay, listen, let's put less money down to close the loan, and then we'll figure out what to do later to get that, immediately after to get that payment lower.
We can have a plan where we can recast the loan, where they can put, I mean, we don't do it essentially, but they can recast the loan with the mortgage company. So if they wanted to put like $50,000 down later, like right after they close, and then they can re-amortize their monthly payment, and then they're not hit for that interest rate hit.
Are there any other incentive programs that are out there?
A lot of people just don't, first-time home buyers don't realize there's just so much about mortgages, right? So you hear like keywords like first-time home buyer programs. And so typically what they're talking about is an FHA loan, which is available to anyone, all the time, as long as they have a qualifying credit score. But there are actually first-time home buyer programs with all the loan programs, FHA, conventional. So they think we're talking FHA because you can put 3.5% down instead of 5%. But with conventional, you can actually put even less down as a first-time home buyer. You can put a minimum of 3% down as long as you qualify, putting that little down, with your ratio. Depending on how much money you make, they're going to look at the average median income. If you are like 80% or lower than the average, then they give you a lower
interest rate and lower mortgage
interest rate, lower mortgage insurance sometimes. That's the way it's supposed to be. Lately, if you price it, it's like kind of the same across the board, but you can still put 3% down no matter what. Typically, if you have, you make higher than the average median income over the 80%, then your interest rate's a little bit higher than it would be with the 5%. But if you're working with a mortgage person who knows how to run the numbers and stuff, you could say, okay, but your interest rate's this much higher, it's costing you an extra $11 a month, but you're saving $10,000, not having to put, upfront, having to put 5% down instead of 3% down, and, figure out depending on how long you're going to be in the house, if that's a good investment upfront or not. So there's for some home buyer programs, there's small grant programs for really the lower income. There's programs out there. You just need to work with a lender who has a very diverse profile of lenders and programs, and you'll kind of get a feeling if they know what they're talking about or not.
What are some of the minimum credit qualifying scores for people?
So in FHA, we can go down to a 580 credit score. You can technically go down to a 560, but if you are in between that 560 and 580 range, you have to have 10% down. So normally people in that range, most of the time, they're not having the 10% down. We don't really do them all that often.
And it's also a manual down.
Right, and then it's a manual underwrite, so you just get the much different guidelines.
Stricter debt ratios, which typically, all of that's just kind of part of the same challenge that they're having, right? If it's a lower credit score, then the debt ratio is typically a little bit higher, and so it's a little challenging.
And then conventional, by the book, you have to have a 620 credit score, but it's still, you have to be able to run it through a desktop underwriter to get it approved. And most of the time, you're not getting conventional approved with less than a 680.
We've actually found recently DU, just for those that don't know, the desktop underwriting system, it's, the underwriting system that all lenders, loan officers everywhere, if you're doing a FHA or conventional loan, basically the conforming loans, you have to be able to get DU approval for the loan. Otherwise, it's a manual downgrade if it's a government loan, or, it's nothing for the others. But so if you cannot get DU approval, then you can't do the loan. No one can. And so DU, it changes its parameters regularly of what it's looking for, just like the lenders do, right? So sometimes you can have a 670 credit score and have some other compensating factors. Maybe they've got good funds or good income or debt ratios or whatever, and you can get it approved. Sometimes even a little bit lower you can. Right now, we're seeing, like, if you don't have at least a 700 credit score, we're not getting DU approval. Or if you don't have a 700 credit score, putting 10% down, like we, play with it to see how we can get it approved. But right now we're in a phase where it's being more strict with conventional loans. I think we're just seeing that all around, as the conventional loans are a little bit tighter in a lot of different ways. The loan level pricing adjustments and things like that. And you're like, okay, everybody just go FHA.
Right.
If you can get all the sellers to understand FHA is amazing.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to accept an FHA offer. It's way better for the buyers right now because the interest rates are lower. The mortgage insurance is very reasonable now. And we don't have all the extra rules at the moment. Way easier to get
So yeah, it's been an interesting few years.
all over the place. Yeah.
So,
And I'm a new realtor, so
Welcome. Welcome.
You gotta get in sometime.
Welcome to madness. It's still a great market.
I know another thing that you wanted to talk about was the 40-year mortgage that FHA announced that they are allowing a 40-year mortgage, but only for people that already own their house. And if they can prove that they're going through some sort of hardship, then you can apply to extend whatever mortgage you're in and extend to a 40-year term. So that way they'll lower your monthly payment and help you get out of your hardship so that you don't go into foreclosure. It's not available if you are wanting to just purchase a house. You can't get a 40-year mortgage if you just want to purchase a new house. So it's only for existing homeowners. And it's really crazy because I've seen things on the news where some people are actually talking about it. Oh yeah, we're going to get a 40-year mortgage. And I'm like, really? It took us a lot of digging to find out that it's fake.
It did. Chat GPT confirmed, guys, that it's fake. It's called a loan modification.
Mhm.
So also, I think the reason why there was support for it being fake is 40-year mortgages do exist. That's a real thing. It's a non-conforming loan. It's not FHA doing a 40-year mortgage on a brand new purchase. It's not Fannie and Freddie doing a 40-year mortgage. It's non-conforming lenders, which if you need a 40-year mortgage, non-conforming loan probably isn't going to be best for you because it's going to be higher interest rates, larger down payment requirements. When you get into non-conforming, it's just totally different guidelines and requirements that typically aren't what's going to be best for someone who's seeking to get their monthly payment lower.
Another other thing you want to talk about was the 2-1 buy down. I mean, right now, they're not really super popular at the moment. They were whenever it changed pretty quickly to a buyer's market, but we're seeing more so it's kind of shifting to more of a seller's market. We haven't seen any buy down agreements in a while.
the whole landscape keeps changing constantly with the real estate, with the mortgages, and so
It's also a good point to bring up. We, in conversations with our buyers, they ask, well, what's the interest rate? And, say, well, for conventional, pretty much conventional and FHA, we're in the 6s. If you've got good credit with FHA, you might make it into the high 5s. And they're like, oh no, that's too much. I'll never buy a house with that. Like, whew, the lack of context, understandable, but these are still very historically low. COVID rates were COVID rates. It was a pandemic. Everybody was terrified. Nobody was going to buy anything, and so outside of another catastrophic global event happening, like that's not going to be real life. But what I actually realized just recently is that interest rates aren't really talked about prior to COVID because there was nothing newsworthy about it, right?
Right.
The only exposure to conversations about interest rates that the most recent two generations that are alive have had, that are in the home buying process has been COVID rates. They didn't know anything about interest rates before. So all they've heard is interest rates in the 2s and 3s. And that's just not real life. Even immediately prior to COVID, interest rates were well into the 5s. We're not that far off. We're maybe 1% off in both the government loans and the conventional loans from where we were immediately. It definitely historically low compared to where we even have been, over the last 20 or 30 years. So when rates come down.
So thank you very much, Kendra and Aimee, for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I will have everyone links in the description.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
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 Bye.